there, my name is Sylvia North. I'm a New Zealand registered dietitian and representative for Coeliac New Zealand in the Medical Advisory Panel. This presentation was brought to you by us, and for more information about how the Coeliac New Zealand and Medical Advisory Panel support those living with celiac disease, you can follow either of these links or our website. Alright, so in this talk we're going to talk about reading food labels. So how do you work out whether a packaged food product is suitable for someone on a gluten-free diet? So we're going to talk a little bit about labeling requirements and the criteria for determining that food manufacturers use to determine if a product is gluten-free. We're going to explain a little bit about allergen warnings and precautionary statements, and then we're going to go through some examples of food packages and whether or not they're gluten-free or not. So to start off, gluten-free claims. So if a product claims to be gluten-free, now this is the sigh of relief in New Zealand, because if a product says gluten-free, you can be sure it's gluten-free. And that is because in New Zealand, packaged foods and beverages are overseen by Food Standards Australia and New Zealand, or FSANZ, and by their legislation, any food product that makes a claim on the front of the packet must actually clarify or provide evidence that that claim is actually true. So when we look at the back of a food label, they also, FSANZ also advises that products need to include an ingredients list, a nutrition information panel, and manufacturer contact details. And another thing that you're going to see on a food label is an allergen declaration, which is not necessarily mandatory, but a really common thing to see on a food label. So if a product says gluten-free, they need to provide evidence. Now, what do I mean by that is a food manufacturer must take their product to an independent lab, where the lab is going to test to see if there are any traces of gluten. And so they've got laboratory equipment to test whether there's equipment. And this is where it gets a little bit sort of different in Australia and New Zealand compared to the rest of the world, because we actually have some really rigid guidelines on what confirms something as being gluten-free. So we use the limit of less than 3 parts per million for determining something as gluten-free. And so that is really absolutely no detectable traces of gluten. The international standards, however, backed by Coeliac, are a little bit more lenient, and so they still say that a product must have less than 20 parts per million. And the reason why there is a bit of discrepancy there is really just with the modernisation of technology. And several years ago, 20 parts per million was as precise as the machinery could go, and now we do have more accurate machinery. So the question is still kind of unclear on whether whether 20 parts per million is acceptable, or whether we should just be going by absolutely no traces. So because of this discrepancy, this is why you might see some products labelled as gluten-free in other countries, not labelled as gluten-free in New Zealand. And that is because they might sit somewhere between that 3 and 20 parts per million in terms of traces of gluten. And so that means that manufacturers, if they want their products to be sold in New Zealand as gluten-free, they need to reformulate, or they might just remove that claim on their food packet. So now when we talked about what you can eat in a gluten-free diet, we said that there is this whole host of foods that are naturally gluten-free. And a lot of food manufacturers aren't going to make a claim about gluten-free because it is an extra cost to their production and to their labelling to make a claim, to pay for the extra testing to prove that it's gluten-free. And so a lot of these products might fit in a category of being gluten-free by ingredient. So that means that the product doesn't contain any ingredients that have wheat, barley, rye, oats, or etc. So when you go through the list of ingredients, you won't see any of those bolded gluten-containing products. This means that you can determine whether or not a product is gluten-free by simply reading the ingredients. And so sometimes it takes a little bit of consistency, a little bit of squinting of the eyes to look at these small little labels. But the beauty here is that if a product contains gluten or has a gluten-containing ingredient such as wheat, it's going to be listed on the label. So it's going to be there somewhere. And if you can't see it, then it's probably gluten-free by ingredient, as we say. So then when you look further a little bit down on the label, usually below the ingredients or below the nutrition panel, there's something called an allergen warning or a contains statement. So contains statements are really important statements that food manufacturers should include on their label if they use allergens in the product. And that's because if someone develops an allergic reaction to common allergens such as you have a child with a peanut allergy or a tree nut allergy, milk, eggs, sesame seeds are also listed as allergens, then and someone becomes really unwell or in fact has been hospitalized because of a reaction, then that doesn't sit too well for a food manufacturer. So a contain statement indicates if it certainly contains this allergen. And wheat and gluten are classified as allergens according to Food Standards Australia and New Zealand. So if a product does say contains wheat or gluten, even if you've had a look at the ingredients and you can't quite see if there's wheat and gluten, if it says contains, then you shouldn't have it. So because that means that it certainly contains your allergen. And then if you see the contain statement and then you flip back to the ingredients, you might also then just find it and it was hiding in the brackets of something or something else like that. So it's important to read the whole label because there are other pieces of information that you can pick up on from those areas. Now this is the tricky one. Precautionary statements. The may contain. And may contain statements are a lot more common on food products. You'll see it on just about everything. And particularly on products that come from large manufacturers that are produced in mass manufacturing, because they often share equipment, and the may contain statements is a way of saying, oh, there's a possibility that this allergen could get in here, but we're not sure, we're not certain. We haven't put it in there on purpose. So the may contain statement is a voluntary statement, and it can tend to be used a little bit inconsistently by industry. And that's because some manufacturers might just put it on there because it's safer than to be sorry. Some manufacturers might still have some really good processes between manufacturing lines to ensure products that may have contained gluten don't become contaminated on the gluten-free line or the other product line. But without actually going to the factory and having a conversation with who's overseeing those processes, there's no real clear way to define whether there's a risk in your may contain statement containing product. Now, general advice is that the complete avoidance of may contain containing products with a may contain statement on is not necessarily required. So if you do avoid everything that had a may contain statement, you might seriously limit your food choices. There is an option to contact food manufacturers for further information, and a lot of people who might regularly consume a product with a may contain statement because it's just a family favourite source or something, they might just go and write a little email to the manufacturers and say, we have celiac disease, what is the actual risk? And you'll come back, and a lot of them will come back with a very informative response. At the end of the day, though, it is your decision of whether or not to eat them, the may contain products. So what we like to say is that you want to be cautious around the foods that have a may contain statement. You don't have to avoid them, but if you say have been following a strict gluten-free diet, but you still have these ongoing issues maybe blood tests are still a bit wonky, or you're having ongoing symptoms, then have a look again at all the foods in your pantry and in your diet that have a may contain statement and avoid them again. So if a product is a really regular part of your diet, then find out more information or find an alternative that doesn't have that statement. And if you're seriously in doubt, then just leave it out. And here are some of the examples of may contain statements just in that green box down there. Okay, now back to that ingredients list. There are some exceptions, and this is where it might also get a little bit confusing, so pay attention. These are your wheat-derived ingredients that are actually gluten-free. And the reason for that is because they become so highly processed that it removes the traces of gluten. But the company still has to declare it as wheat in brackets because wheat is a class classified as an allergen. So that's glucose syrup, and glucose syrup is used in a lot of confectionery. Caramel colouring again in confectionery, dextrose, maltodextrin, sorbitol. They're totally appropriate to consume on a gluten-free diet, so no concern with those. Always check and recheck your labels, okay? So even if you think, even when you've got your go-to products, the thing is manufacturing changes and companies will change their products. And so it's really important to check and recheck these labels, about every 2 or 3 months, to have a review on, companies might change the factory that they produce their product. They might use a different additive or a cheaper, lower cost or better tasting additive. So just get into a habit of flicking the packets around and getting familiar. But if you're seriously in doubt, then leave it out, give it some time until you find the alternative that you're sure of. Alright, now let's go into some examples. One thing that I first want to say about reading labels is they're not scary, they're just kind of really inconsistent in the way that they're laid out. So you need to read a lot of them and get comfortable with where you're looking for information. They will all include at the top, not necessarily at the top, but it will be there, an ingredients list, a nutrition information panel, if there are traces of something that's an allergen, they'll have a contains statement as well. And if you look around somewhere else on the label, you also find manufacturing contact details and a lot number so that you can specifically trace that product if needed. Okay, so this first example, it's an easy example, is a product that contains gluten. Okay, so the manufacturers made it really nice and easy for us because they've indicated gluten in bold and it's the first ingredient. Now what you should know about the ingredients list is that the ingredient that is most prominent in the product will be listed at the top. So this product is mainly made of wheat flour. It's a cereal grain derived from wheat, whole wheat, and so this food contains gluten for sure. If I looked at the front or the back or the side, I'm probably not going to see anything that says it's gluten-free because it's just certainly not. So you can see that for sure when you flip around the back. The allergen is indicated in bold. It contains wheat flour. And we also have, if you just kind of look down a little bit further, at the bottom of the ingredients list, under milk decoration, there is a wheat dextrose. Now, wheat dextrose was one of our ingredients that actually is gluten-free. Remember? So wheat dextrose is highly processed. So let's now have a look at these foods that are gluten-free by ingredient. Okay, so we have a packet of pork sausages, and what we're going to do is what you do in the supermarket is you're looking through the ingredients row. So this is the ingredients box at the top here, and what you're going to do is you screen through to see if there are any products containing wheat, barley, oats, gluten, to rule out whether it is gluten-free or not. And from this nutrition information panel, the product is gluten-free by ingredient. Then when we look at the rice crackers below, they're also gluten-free ingredient, and then I can also see that they have indeed also tested for gluten. So there's gluten at the bottom of the nutrition information panel, which is 0 milligrams or non-detectable, so the product is indeed gluten-free. And now let's look at a product that claims to be gluten-free. So this is a popular loaf of bread, and you can even see in the ingredients, below the ingredients, they've got a number of gluten-free claims. They say gluten and dairy-free with a big exclamation mark, and made in a gluten-free bakery. So they're very certain that their product is gluten-free. So first when you look through the ingredients list, I can't see any sources of wheat or gluten or rye or oats or barley, so there are no gluten-containing ingredients. And then when you look further to the side, there's a nutrition information panel, and they've actually shown you that they have tested for gluten and it was not detected. Okay, so testing confirms gluten-free status, which means they're allowed to say that they are gluten-free. And on the front of the packet of this product, they'll have a big claim that says gluten-free. And so that might be part of the reason why a gluten-free product is a little bit more expensive, because they actually do have to pay for their regular testing and ensuring that their product is completely safe. There's also a cost that goes into producing a separate gluten-free bakery. So they've got a separate bakery, a separate mill set up for producing all of these gluten-free products, so there's absolutely no risk of cross-contamination. One of the last ways to know if a product is gluten-free is by the crossed grain logo. Now there are other forms of the crossed grain logo used internationally. This is the one that we have on New Zealand products, and it is a product that is endorsed by Coeliac New Zealand, and it actually, when I talked back about the difference between the Food Standards Australia New Zealand FSANZ standards and the Coeliac standards, this is a product, so products with this logo will actually be compliant with the Coeliac standard. So they might not necessarily be able to say gluten-free on the front of their package if they haven't been compliant to Food Standards Australia New Zealand, but they will be compliant to the Coeliac standards. So there's no one product that's better than the other. This is just a different way of communicating that a product is gluten-free by the Coeliac standard, and they do have a similar auditing system where they have their products tested every 12 months. There's random auditing, and the other cool thing about product that uses a logo do go to supporting Coeliac New Zealand with the cool things they do for the Coeliac community. So that's another one to look out on food packets as another way of seeing that a product is gluten-free. And the beauty of this sort of thing is it's a way to visually see from the front of the packet when you're at a supermarket, but also when you flip around the back, you'll be able to see through the ingredients that it doesn't contain gluten. So to summarise, in New Zealand, products must declare all gluten-containing ingredients. So you're going to see it in a contain statement or listed bold on the ingredients. They do their best to make it easy to find. If it says gluten-free, then this means that there has been a test to confirm that there is no detectable trace of gluten. If you can't find any gluten-containing ingredients in the ingredients list, and there's no contain statement that says gluten, then we say that it is gluten-free by ingredient and probably appropriate. However, there's still sort of, it's a little bit difficult to sometimes determine the risk with may-contains products, and overall the opinion is that it's still your decision to consume it whether or not. You do not have to avoid products with a may-contain statement, but if there's cause for concern, you can contact the manufacturer for some clarification around the risk associated with that product. this presentation was prepared for you by myself and my colleague Margaret. We're both New Zealand registered dietitians and representatives from Coeliac New Zealand Medical Advisory Panel, and thank you for listening.